A Christian biblical canon is the set of books that a Christian denomination regards as divinely inspired, and thus constituting a Christian Bible. Although the early church primarily used the Septuagint or the Targums among Aramaic speakers, the apostles did not leave a defined set of new scriptures. Instead, the canon of the New Testament developed over time. Like the development of the Old Testament canon, that of the New Testament canon was gradual. The Catholic Encyclopedia article on the New Testament describes the process of assembling the histories and letters circulated within the early Church until the canon was approved by a series of councils seeking to ensure legitimacy as inspired scripture. The idea of a complete and clear-cut canon of the New Testament existing from the beginning, that is from apostolic times, has no foundation in history. The canon of the New Testament, like that of the Old, is the result of a development, of a process at once stimulated by disputes with doubters, both within and without the Church, and retarded by certain obscurities and natural hesitations, and which did not reach its final term until the dogmatic definition of the Tridentine Council. 50 Bibles of Constantine. In 331, Constantine I commissioned Eusebius to deliver 50 Bibles for the Church of Constantinople. Athanasius recorded Alexandrian scribes around 340 preparing Bibles for Constans. Little else is known, though there is plenty of speculation. For example, it is speculated that this may have provided motivation for canon lists, and that Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus are examples of these Bibles. Those codices contain almost a full version of the Septuagint. Vaticanus is only lacking 1 to 3 Maccabees, and Sinaiticus is lacking 2 to 3 Maccabees. 1 Esd Ras, Baruch and Letter of Jeremiah. Together with the Peshitta and Codex Alexandrinus, these are the earliest extant Christian Bibles. There is no evidence among the canons of the First Council of Nicaea of any determination on the canon. However, Jerome, in his prologue to Judith, makes the claim that the Book of Judith was found by the Nicene Council to have been counted among the number of the sacred scriptures. The Vulgate Bible. Pope Damasus's commissioning of the Latin Vulgate edition of the Bible, 383, was instrumental in the fixation of the canon in the West. This list, given below, was purportedly endorsed by Pope Damasus I. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Jesus, Nave, Judges, Ruth, 4 books of Kings, 2 books of Chronicles, Job, Psalter of David, 5 books of Solomon, 12 books of prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, Tobit, Judith, Esther, 2 books of Esd Ras, 2 books of Maccabees, and in the New Testament, 4 books of Gospels, 1 book of Acts of the Apostles, 13 letters of the Apostle Paul, 1 of him to the Hebrews, 2 of Peter, 3 of John, 1 of James, 1 of Jude, and the Apocalypse of John. The 2 books of Esd Ras refer to the Book of Ezra and the Book of Nehemiah, like what is appeared as 1 book in the Hebrew Bible. Jerome, as the author of the Vulgate, in the preface of the books of Samuel and Kings, explains the following. To the 3rd class belong the Hagiographa, of which the 1st book begins with Job, the 8th, Ezra, which itself is likewise divided amongst Greeks and Latins into 2 books, the 9th is Esther. Pope Damasus I is often considered to be the father of the modern Catholic canon, purporting to date from a Council of Rome under Pope Damasus I in 382. The so-called Damasian list, appended to the pseudepigraphical Decretum Gelasianum, gives a list identical to what would be the Canon of Trent, and, though the text may in fact not be Damasian, it is at least a valuable 6th-century compilation. The Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church states that a council probably held at Rome in 382 under St. Damasus gave a complete list of the canonical books of both the Old Testament and the New Testament, which is identical with the list given at Trent, Augustine and the North African canons. Augustine of Hippo declared without qualification that one is to prefer those that are received by all Catholic churches to those which some of them do not receive. By Catholic churches, Augustine meant those who concurred in this judgment, since many Eastern churches rejected some of the books Augustine upheld as universally received. In the same passage, Augustine asserted that these dissenting churches should be outweighed by the opinions of the more numerous and weightier churches, which would include Eastern churches, the prestige of which Augustine stated moved him to include the Book of Hebrews among the canonical writings, though he had reservation about its authorship. Augustine called 3 synods on canonicity: the Synod of Hippo in 393, the Synod of Carthage in 397, and another in Carthage in 419 AD. Each of these reiterated the same church law: nothing shall be read in church under the name of the divine scriptures, except the Old Testament and the canonical books of the New Testament. These decrees also declared by fiat that Epistle to the Hebrews was written by Paul, for a time ending all debate on the subject. Philip Schaff says that the Council of Hippo in 393, and the Third Council of Carthage in 397, under the influence of Augustine, who attended both, fixed the Catholic canon of the Holy Scriptures, including the Apocrypha of the Old Testament. This decision of the Transmarine Church, however, was subject to ratification, and the concurrence of the Roman See it received when Innocent I and Gelasius I repeated the same index of biblical books. This canon remained undisturbed till the 16th century, and was sanctioned by the Council of Trent at its 4th session. According to Lee Martin MacDonald, the Revelation was added to the list in 419. These councils were convened under the influence of St. Augustine, who regarded the canon as already closed. A consensus emerges. The division of opinion over the canon was not over the core, but over the fringe, and from the 4th century, there existed unanimity in the West concerning the New Testament canon, and by the 5th century the East, with a few exceptions, had come to accept the Book of Revelation and thus had come into harmony on the matter of the canon, at least for the New Testament. This period marks the beginning of a more widely recognized canon, although the inclusion of some books was still debated. Epistle to Hebrews, James, 2 John, 3 John, 2 Peter, Jude and Revelation. Grounds for debate included the question of authorship of these books, the suitability for use, and how widely they were actually being used. Christian scholars assert that when these bishops and councils spoke on the matter, however, they were not defining something new, but instead were ratifying what had already become the mind of the Church. Eastern canons. The Eastern churches had, in general, a weaker feeling than those in the West for the necessity of making a sharp delineation with regard to the canon. They were more conscious of the gradation of spiritual quality among the books that they accepted and were less often disposed to assert that the books which they rejected possessed no spiritual quality at all. For example, the Trullan Synod of 691 to 692, which was rejected by Pope Constantine, endorsed the following lists of canonical writings: the Apostolic Canons, the Synod of Laodicea, the Third Synod of Carthage, and the 39th Festal Letter of Athanasius. And yet, these lists do not agree. The Synod of Hippo Regis and the Synod of Carthage also address the canon and are discussed here. Similarly, the New Testament canons of the Syriac, Armenian, Georgian, Egyptian Coptic and Ethiopian churches all have minor differences. The Revelation of John is one of the most uncertain books. It was not translated into Georgian until the 10th century, and it has never been included in the official lectionary of the Eastern Orthodox Church, whether in Byzantine or modern times. Peshitta, the late 5th or early 6th century Peshitta of the Syrian Orthodox Church, includes a 22-book NT, excluding 2 Peter, 2 John, 3 John, Jude, and Revelation. MacDonald and Sanders, Appendix D2, lists the following Syrian catalogue of St. Catherine's, c. 400. The Syriac Peshitta, used by all the various Syrian churches, originally did not include 2 Peter, 2 John, 3 John, Jude and Revelation and Theodoret from the school of Antioch. It also includes Psalm chapter 151 and Psalm chapters 152 to 155 and 2 Baruch. Western Syrians have added the remaining 5 books to their NT canons in modern times. Today, the official lectionaries followed by the Malankara Syrian Orthodox Church, with headquarters at Kottayam, and the Chaldean Syrian Church, also known as the Church of the East, with headquarters at Trikua, still present lessons from only the 22 books of the original Peshitta. Armenian canon. The Armenian Bible introduces one addition, a third letter to the Corinthians, also found in the Acts of Paul, which became canonized in the Armenian Church, but is not part of the Armenian Bible today. Revelation, however, was not accepted into the Armenian Bible until c. 1200 AD, when Archbishop Nerses arranged an Armenian synod at Constantinople to introduce the text. Still, there were unsuccessful attempts even as late as 1290 AD to include in the Armenian canon several apocryphal books. Advice of the Mother of God to the Apostles, the books of Priapos, and the ever-popular Epistle of Barnabas. The Armenian Apostolic Church at times has included the testaments of the 12 patriarchs in its Old Testament and the third epistle to the Corinthians, but does not always list it with the other 27 canonical New Testament books. East African canons. The New Testament of the Coptic Bible, adopted by the Egyptian Church, does not include the 2 epistles of Clement. The canon of the Teluehedo churches is somewhat looser than for other traditional Christian groups, and the order, naming, and chapter-verse division of some of the books is also slightly different. The Ethiopian, narrow, canon includes 81 books altogether. The 27-book New Testament, those are Old Testament books found in the Septuagint and accepted by the Orthodox, as well as Enoch, Jubilees, 1 ESD Ras, 2 ESD Ras, rest of the words of Baruch and 3 books of Maccabean. The broader Ethiopian New Testament canon includes 4 books of Synodos, 2 books of Covenant, Ethiopic Clement, and Ethiopic Didascalia. However, these books have never been printed or widely studied. This broader canon is also sometimes said to include, with the Old Testament, an 8-part history of the Jews based on the writings of Flavius Josephus, known as Pseudo-Josephus, or Joseph Ben-Gurion. Reformation era. Before the Protestant Reformation, there was the Council of Florence. During the life, and with the approval of this council, Eugenius IV issued several bulls, or decrees, with a view to restore the Oriental schismatic bodies to communion with Rome. And according to the common teaching of theologians, these documents are infallible statements of doctrine. The Decretum Pro Jacobitus contains a complete list of the books received by the Church as inspired, but omits, perhaps advisedly, the terms canon and canonical. The Council of Florence therefore taught the inspiration of all the scriptures, but did not formally pass on their canonicity. It was not until the Protestant reformers began to insist upon the supreme authority of Scripture alone that it became necessary to establish a definitive canon. Martin Luther was troubled by 4 New Testament books: Jude, James, Hebrews, and Revelation, and though he placed him in a secondary position relative to the rest, he did not exclude them. Martin Luther proposed removing these anti-legomena, the books of Hebrews, James, Jude and Revelation from the canon, echoing the consensus of some Catholics, also labeled Christian humanists, such as Cardinal Ximenes, Cardinal Cajetan, and Erasmus, and partially because they were perceived to go against certain Protestant doctrines such as sola gratia and sola fide, but this was not generally accepted among his followers. However, these books are ordered last in the German-language Luther Bible to this day. Luther also removed books and additions to books of the Old Testament that are not found in the Hebrew Masoretic text and put them in a section which he labeled Apocrypha, commonly known as the Biblical Apocrypha. Catholics call these books the Deuterocanonicals. Council of Trent. In light of Martin Luther's demands, the Council of Trent on 8 April 1546 approved the present Catholic Bible canon, which includes the Deuterocanonical books, and the decision was confirmed by an anathema by vote. The Council confirming the same list as produced at the Council of Florence in 1442, Augustine's 397 to 419 Councils of Carthage, and probably Damasus's 382 Council of Rome. The Old Testament books that had been rejected by Luther were later termed deuterocanonical, not indicating a lesser degree of inspiration, but a later time of final approval. Beyond these books, some editions of the Latin Vulgate include Psalm chapter 151, the Prayer of Manasseh, 1 Esdras, 2 Esdras, and the Epistle to the Laodiceans in an appendix, styled Apocrypha. Protestant confessions. Several Protestant confessions of faith identify the 27 books of the New Testament canon by name, including the French Confession of Faith, the Belgic Confession, and the Westminster Confession of Faith. The 39 Articles, issued by the Church of England in 1563, names the books of the Old Testament, but not the New Testament. The Belgic Confession and Westminster Confession named the 39 books in the Old Testament and, apart from the aforementioned New Testament books, expressly rejected the canonicity of any others. None of the confessional statements issued by any Lutheran church includes an explicit list of canonical books. Synod of Jerusalem. The Synod of Jerusalem in 1672 decreed the Greek Orthodox canon, which is similar to the one decided by the Council of Trent. The Greek Orthodox generally consider Psalm chapter 151 to be part of the Book of Psalms. Likewise, the books of the Maccabees are 4 in number, though 4 Maccabees is generally in an appendix, along with the Prayer of Manasseh. Also, there are 2 books of Esdras. For the Greeks these books are 1 Esdras and Ezra Nehemiah. See Esdras #. Differences in names for details. The Greek Orthodox generally consider the Septuagint to be divinely inspired. Apocrypha. Various books that were never canonized by any church, but are known to have existed in antiquity, are similar to the New Testament and often claim apostolic authorship, are known as the New Testament Apocrypha. Likewise, there are certain books similar to the Old Testament that Protestants, Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox agree should be excluded from the biblical canon. Modern canons. Today, most biblical compilations comply with either the standards set forth by the British and Foreign Bible Society in 1825, which corresponds to the so-called Protestant Bible, or with one that includes the biblical Apocrypha and Deuterocanonical books prescribed for so-called Catholic Bibles. Other common variations include the pocket-sized Gideon's International versions that include the New Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs, although the selection of books for inclusion does not comprise a canon.